Eternal Weekend and Be in Control with Anuraag Das.
Next on Eternal Dirtle. Hey, I just want to give a quick shout out to all of our Patreon supporters out there. Thank you to the Dirtle Maniacs. If you want to be a Dirtle Maniac, go to patreon.com/eternaldurtles and help support the channel. It keeps things going. It keeps things updated. Thanks so much for watching. On with the show. Hello and welcome to Eternal Dirtles. I'm your host, Zach Clark, and with me as always, Phil Blackman. Phil, how's it going, man?
Zach, we have a very special guest on the cast today. Last time we were together in person, we played some legacy games against each other, and he crushed me. He crushed me so good that he gave me the pity pack afterwards and was like, good job, bro. Good job. With us today, Anuraag Das. Welcome to the cast.
Anuraag, how's it going, man?
Hey, what it do?
What it do, baby?
I think the last time I saw Anu, we were jamming out to Frodo Baggins live on stage.
Oh yeah, I remember that. That was honestly, it's funny because just the other day I was like rewatching Lord of the Rings with my in-laws who had flown over, and I was like, I saw that guy. He's a DJ, and they were like, Frodo? Yeah, Elijah Wood. I did not like his music too much. Oh, yeah, but that's just me personally.
It was it was such a like 90s like chill sounds commercial thing that they did, like the Sail Away song and stuff. I was like, oh, okay, I see where we're going here. But I think that for me, at those events, I want something a little less. I want something that's a little less celebrity. Just I want to hang out with the locals.
Give him some credit, dude. He walked into Mordor, survived Mount Doom, and then came back and did a DJ set. Like,
I got into it. I did it, and I know I wasn't supposed to, but I just I got into an argument about the Eagles and why we couldn't just Eagles, and I'll just leave it at that. I ain't getting into this.
Being from Philly, never getting into an argument about the Eagles. That's a bad idea.
They'll burn the city down. Yeah. They'll burn the whole city down.
So yeah, we're here. We've got you on a rare treat for us, because you have an announcement that we'll be sharing once this video is ready.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm very stoked to announce that I'll be doing coverage at Eternal Weekend for the NA Champs. By the time this video is out, more likely than not, I will also have already done coverage of Europe's Eternal Weekend. So it's honestly super cool that this year coverage is happening.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It's amazing.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like, it's just, it always makes me happy when the powers that be are like, you know what? Yeah. We want coverage. And especially for Eternal Weekend, like Legacy and Vintage, this is their like time to shine.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And where will we be able to see this coverage?
Yeah. So still kind of figuring out where the North America one's going to be. It's either at twitch.tv/cardtitan or twitch.tv, maybe like on my page or something like that. Eternal Weekend Europe is definitely happening on my page, though, twitch.tv/unzmtg. So that'll be pretty exciting, and I'm looking forward to seeing how those games play out. It's gonna be pretty sweet.
Well, I mean, at the very least, we'll have all your links below, and follow Anu on Twitter, and hit the notifications button so that you just see when this stuff's going on, and then you'll just know.
And this is
high five, nice plug.
This is also like, this feels like the first major step in the culmination of like all of the work that Anu has done. Yeah. Of like out of pocket his own to get coverage to happen for Legacy.
Yeah, I think it bears kind of introducing you to people who don't know any better. What you've actually been doing for the last couple of years.
Yeah, so I just like used to be like a Legacy homie. I'd stream on Twitch and things like that. And then like after the pandemic, there was an event, SCGCon Philly, I think it was. It was like the first event after coming back from the pandemic kind of deal. And I was like, you know what? It's really exciting that SCG is going to put some cameras over this event. It's going to be like the good old days. And then I got a notification that was just like, oh, well, they're not doing anything. They've moved away from it. So I was like, all right, well, this is not going to happen. I mean, like, you know how it is, right? Like back in the day, like it's like Sunday or something, and you would just turn on your computer. Yeah, and you just like watch like Reed Duke playing elves against like Joe Lisette on Miracles, and you're like, all right, that's my jam, right? And so it really got me thinking. It's just like, well, I really don't want us to lose that. And so I said, all right, I'm just gonna pack my bags. I have my phone. I have like a little tripod thing. Put a camera over some matches. Let's go. And yeah, what's up?
I was just going to highlight that this, like, all of the stuff that you've done, that Anuraag has done for coverage for Legacy, stems way back even before he had like his video setup that has like progressively gotten better over time as well. There was the time back in like the old GP days where we were traveling to the big events. We would be at the top 8 tables and we'd be on the side, and Anu would be live tweeting what was going on in the top 8. Just straight up doing written coverage off on his Twitter so people could follow along with stuff that wasn't there. I remember it. I was next to you when you were doing that stuff, and I was like, dude, what is going on that you're like because you looked like frantically typing on your phone. And you're like, and you were just like, dude, it's coverage, it's what it is. It's like,
yeah. I remember that too, because like I wanted to there was GP Bologna where I did that. I think there was also Eternal Weekend a couple years ago, like in 2019, where like I really wanted to be part of coverage. So I straight up I just like walked to Nick Koss and I was like, hey, look, I'll do this for free. Here's why you should hire me, or not, just like let me do this. And it was awesome. It was like maybe like one of the best experiences I've had. I think I had an interview even with David Lance, Static Gripped, who is a longtime Legacy player. But yeah, then fast forward to like now, and effectively like I think I just got hooked. Like it was a project that I was really invested in, and I just kept like growing and growing and growing. And now, I'm traveling to Prague with like 200 pounds of audio video equipment, trying to like figure my way out here. And it's transitioned from like something small into something that I would love to do like full time, try to figure that out, like how to turn, like thinking about it from like a business perspective almost, which is kind of exciting. I
think eventually they're gonna have to get you an assistant pretty soon, like
dude, tell me about it.
Carrying 200 pounds of equipment. I mean, I used to be a photo assistant. I know that ain't easy.
yeah. I tell everyone I have a system which is like using like a Velcro strap to like tie 2 suitcases together so that I only have to pull. It's rickety. Yeah. It's something else. I
think it's a giant boon for the Legacy community to have anyone doing this, but like you're doing it and you're upgrading. I mean, at personal expense. You're out there updating your system and making it better, and like learning the craft. And to me, like we need more of that in Legacy, and it's amazing to have somebody that's up there just doing it, just taking the initiative and doing it. If you'll pardon my
pardon. Yeah, I heard it. I winced a little bit.
Yeah. The hair on the back of my neck stood
out. I didn't mean to say taking the initiative. I'm so sorry.
Don't you know who you're with right now? Look at the people on the sides of you, Sam.
On the left and the right. Yeah.
So for anybody who like wants to, with EW coming up in both for Europe and North America, last year's North America EW, the coverage from that event was Anuraag stuff. Like that was his own thing. That's not like it was coordinated with Eternal Weekend. Like also like that was Anu doing it. He was on the side of the top 8 the entire time doing that coverage. So like to see like the quality of the coverage that's being put up, and it's only going to get better from here. So like Anu, what is it that like what is the projection that you see from here now that you're getting some support from the powers that be, as you said? Where is it going to go from here? And then like what is it that you think are going to be the hurdles that maybe others could help you along the way with?
And the third part of that, what's your ideal situation?
Okay. So I'll answer that question last, because that one's kind of tricky. But I think from this point on, what I'm really looking forward to, or what I'm really focusing on, is revenue generation. So I'll say like last year, 2022 was all about creating the concept and proving that there is an MVP, like a minimum viable product that exists for this, right? Is there a market? Do people want to watch? Like those kind of things, right? And obviously, like I don't even know why I asked it, but like, for all intents and purposes, like, if you're thinking about like what is the business plan for this, because realistically speaking, it costs a lot of money. I think one of the biggest stalwarts to like the costs of coverage online is like Cedric Phillips. He'll always be like, people don't really know what it's like to have to like put together all this equipment, have to put together an ensemble, all the logistics that go behind it. And when I went into it, I was like, damn, like there's a lot of stuff. I'd like to say that I have a couple of workarounds. I got it to work. People started getting interested in it, so I was like, okay, I'll keep growing and growing and growing. Now, where I'm at from a technical perspective, I think I've sort of reached final form. Like I'm thinking, I've got like hand cams for everybody. I've got really fancy overhead cams. I've got table mics that I recently added, even like a card reader if somebody needs to see a new card or something like that. There's a lot of cool stuff out there. Maybe I could now start focusing on like the visual elements a little bit more on the screen, but that's all like coding related stuff that I'm particularly bad at. And I'm working with a couple people to put together some awesome stuff here for Eternal Weekend and even like DreamHack in December. So that's something that I'm very proud of. And shout out to Jordan, who basically if you don't know, like have you heard of like the Swiss Triangle website? Like
no, please
that website.
Enlighten us.
Oh yeah. It's something that I used like way back. Like it's like Swiss Triangle, BradleyJX.net or something like that. And it turns out that guy Jordan is just he makes everything happen in Magic. Like the most impactful unknown person in Magic, and honestly at this point not even unknown, because you talk to TOs and you talk to people, Jordan's name is a very very revered one. Anyways, so yeah, I think that's like the next move is to like sort of make it like visually more appealing, trying to figure out like what gets somebody into coverage from like a strategic perspective and gets them to stay, right?
Welcome to content creation.
A lot of my yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's basically what it is. It's like another chapter, right? I think a lot of my work is reminiscent of like what SCG used to do, but I want to like dial it up to the next level. I mean, we have so much technology, and we have just like I don't know. I want to make coverage more exciting, right? Because I think there's some fundamental things about Magic the Gathering specifically, like comparing it to other games like League of Legends or like Counter-Strike or whatever it is. You don't always have like flashy things on the screen. So figuring out how to destroy like the barrier of entry, and then also keep it interesting, keep it fresh. Those are like, very, very, very difficult concepts to sort of find answers for. And that's like the theoretical aspect of it. I think there's also now like the business aspect of it, which is at this point, I've done probably like 20 shows over 2 years, which if you think about it, it's like once a month almost, maybe sometimes even more. Yeah. That's a lot of flying. So then, like I mentioned, it's about marketing too, which is like, if this is going to be something that exists, beyond just like the 1 year or the 2 years that I'm doing this for fun, money has to be coming in somehow, right? Like we have to be adults, put our big boy pants on, and just be like, how are we paying for this? The next flight after that? How are we paying casters? How are we covering internet? How are we doing all these sort of things, right? And so that's sort of been the challenge of finding sponsors and things like that. I think like this is something that you mentioned, Phil, which was like last year's Eternal Weekend, right? And I want to take a moment to just talk about this, which is that event was potentially the biggest disaster I ran into until the community came together and made it the most amazing event that I have ever streamed. And obviously it's going to be the Eternal Players Legacy and Vintage who are coming together to hang out. But I'll give you a little bit. There's a little bit of tea here, but basically I was trying to coordinate with Card Titan last year to figure out how to do coverage for their event. And it was really tricky because they hadn't announced it, as we all know. Like it was a very close, like close to the event sort of announcement. And I'm sure they had like their logistic concerns on their own end, whether it was working with Wizards or planning or whatever it is. Like can't really fault them for that. They're put in a position. But I didn't find out about until 20 minutes after arriving on the venue that there's this thing called union fees that you have to pay.
Welcome to the cons.
Yeah, exactly, right? To stream in specifically Philadelphia, which is why this year the fact that it is in Pittsburgh is like so much better. But straight up, like two people from the union for that convention center walked up to me and were like, "Hey, like if you want to do this, it's going to cost you $5,000." And I was like, "Well, I just don't have that kind of money." And within 2 hours, I mean, Roland Chang was like, "Hey, put up a GoFundMe, see what happens." 2 hours and it got funded. Amazing. And I was just like, yeah, literally, like I was like almost in tears because it was just like that tells you like how important coverage is to the people, right? that like, people want to see these games. They're literally historical points in, like, the Magic timeline that need to be preserved, right? We can't just forget them. There's an iconic picture of, like, Raja, who's holding the card that he won for winning Vintage Champs. Where and it's just it's a vibe. It's just like him. He's like, I did it. This is like one of my like lifetime goals. Playing Magic, and like props. Like, imagine if we just like never got to see those games pan out. It'd be kind of disastrous. So coming back to this year, the plan is to like have money so that like I don't run into those kind of problems. Like, or like if I do run into those kind of problems, the show can still go on, because at the end of the day, that's what matters to me, right? That's what matters to you. Like you guys are content creators. You understand. It's like, we want to produce something. It has to happen. You just have that drive in you to make it happen. So I guess long story short, this year has been more about, finding sponsors who are interested in supporting, and then also finding like TOs to work with, marketing plans that are viable so that the next show can happen.
So before we get into the ideal situation, one of your sponsors and our sponsor is Moxfield, and I wanted to give a quick shout out to Moxfield. Eternal Dirtles is proud to be sponsored by Moxfield. Moxfield is the best Magic the Gathering deck building website on the internet. You can create, share, and find decks from Commander to Legacy, and even fan-supported formats like Pre-Modern and Old School. You can see all of our decks on our Moxfield. Follow the links below to stay tuned. So let's talk about your ideal situation.
Yeah. So the ideal situation is, well, I'm not doing it on my own. I have maybe like one or two or maybe three other people who are helping out. Why is this important? I kind of like teeter on the verge of like burnout sometimes. Like, it's just like there's only so many flights where I can lug 200 pounds of luggage. At some point, I feel like
work.
there's yeah, right. It's a decent workout. Yeah. But it's like there's a lot to do, and I think to get to the next level as well. For example, like if I wanted to do player interviews, right? I can't handle like producing, directing, and doing an interview at the same time. It's just what it is. Like, I would literally need a clone of myself to do it, so that we could actually have someone like ask questions, answer questions, record all that kind of stuff. Or somebody to develop stuff in the back end. Like I mentioned earlier, Jordan, he's been an absolute behemoth just helping there in that department. That's really what it is. Now the problem obviously with that is like I am doing all this stuff like out of pocket, right? Like I'm just like hyper passionate about this. That's why I do it. I cannot in good faith like ask that of anybody else, because the regimen is like, it's quite insane, honestly. Like if you think about it, like I think like last year alone I spent maybe like $50,000, and like who's gonna do that, right? Like honestly, like shout out to my wife for even being like okay with it, kind of just acknowledging like like hey, all right, this is your dream, go for it. But finding the money to hire additional people who are committed to the bit, to learn, like maybe there's a weekend where I don't need to go, right? That I know there will be people on site who are very proficient in how to do it, who have the passion to not accept mistakes of any kind, who also have also like developed the same sort of relationships, basically like clones of me, people who are interested, right? That's what it is. I guess what I'm trying to say is, you could cue the Avengers music. I'm trying to build a team, right? Like that would be the ideal world. The problem is it's just like way too expensive to do that.
Well, I think it goes without saying, you have my bow and Phil's axe if you ever need it.
Anu, with all of this talk of, now that you're like actually getting some amount of support from WotC, are you able to talk about like what that support specifically is, and then what support you feel you need going further that's beyond that? Now that there's like, if we're talking about like what you need financially in sort of the help, is that a space that you think WotC will be able to help accommodate, or do you think that it's going to be more community based on your own, sort of figuring it out outside of WotC, and then WotC just like tips the hat and is like, yes, you have our blessing?
Mm-hmm. Um, that's a really good question. I think the other thing that I have done that's part of like marketing overall is like networking, developing relationships. And I've met a lot of fantastic people at Wizards. Um, it's a process, I think, because there's like so much stuff going on in the air, and I can't really speak to too much of it, but it is definitely something that I want to have conversations with Wizards about to figure out how I can. So, like, here's the other thing too: is like I've realized that the best kind of content, and this is I think just high level generic stuff, anyways, right? Content must provide value. Now, generally, it's like entertainment value. Maybe in the scope of Magic, there's some educational value. I think what I provide from a value perspective is like twofold. I have the equipment to capture something that nobody else can at the moment, right? Like coverage is like still coming back, I think, and it would like for a team like Star City, for example, to chime in. And this is the second point. I am way cheaper than other alternatives, right? Because I'm a single person, right? For me, it's just a weekend. Everyone else has to hire a crew, and then they have to like do this, pay that, like blah blah blah, all that sort of stuff, right? So I think for that reason, it's kind of persuasive. It's conversations that still have to really like get fleshed out yet. I'm hoping they go well. I'm hoping they go well.
Phil and I are in the middle of that too. With we're looking at starting some events through Wizards and stuff. So it's always like it's just you know that they've got a lot going on their end. So it's like you just slow going and try and keep a positive mentality about it, and hopefully everybody comes together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, until then, it really is. There's been a lot of help from the community. I feel kind of torn about this because I don't think it's the community's responsibility to sort of provide for these sort of things. Similarly, it's like I don't know if it should necessarily all come down out of my pocket or whatever too, but that's why I think like reaching out to third party sponsors and trying to figure out like who actually has the budget to support this, who actually has the bandwidth to make this happen. Like those are the people that I want to target, and I wouldn't even be surprised if some portion of those people are not even within the Magic universe, right? Like just like non-endemic populations that I have to go out and be like, hey, like I have this product. Here are some numbers. Are you interested? That kind of conversation.
Well, so from there, we've covered coverage, but let's talk about your deck of choice right now. Let's switch over and talk a little strategy. Let's talk legacy. So you're on Beanpile lately, and we have a deck tech coming up for that relatively soon. But let's just go over some broad strokes about Beanpile.
Yeah, I mean, this is IMO, like the fire successor to Miracles. And I know a lot of the things I'm about to say, by the way, Phil, just like straight up like trigger warning. All right, I'm just gonna say it. All right, get ready. So like I used to play hard control back in the day, counterbalance top, all the good stuff. The one card that has stuck with me through all of my legacy career is unironically Terminus. Through the good days and the bad days. Portland, I'm looking at you. Oh wait, Phil still plays
that. Whoa. It's getting personal. Yo, I'll say nobody in my life have I talked to more about whether or not we should be playing Monastery Mentor and if it should be in like 2 copies, 3 copies, or 4 copies than Anu. No, granted, like the last time we talked about it was like, I don't know, like 2018 or whatever. But like, that conversation of like, is Daze playable? Is Monastery Mentor playable? And just the back and forth while people are just like, dark ritualing us is.
Let me grab something. I want to show this to you. This is actually insane. You're going to love this, Phil. One sec.
What could it be? If it's a severed head, I'm going to be very upset.
When it comes to Miracle Mages, the stuff that we're willing to pull out and play in our 75 or 95 in some cases is, here it is. You know what?
This is the note. This is the notebook. Notebook is like 4 or 5 years old, but I'm just gonna I'm glad that there's a video element. I'm gonna like also sort of explain here, but you can sort of see here. This is how I used to build miracles. This word up here, Breitling at the top. I guess it's like backwards kind of deal, but like I would break down literally everything, like how I built my decks out. Right, just like 3 copies of Terminus, 2 copies of like Supreme Verdict. This is the lab, right? Like there's so many different different things here. Like I used to write down strategy like concerns in game 1, Jace versus Rishadon port, things like that. You know what I'm saying? Like
the answer is Sabo's Web, my guy, to this day.
Dude, tell me about. I'm pretty sure it's written down somewhere here in this Bible of mine.
To this day, the answer to port.
I used to have one of those when I was big in the punk scene. I'd keep that in my little cargo pant pocket and take down people's instant messenger names.
Wow. Okay, Dad.
You want to know?
Right.
Here's one aspect that I don't know if any other archetype like really delves into, in the way that miracle mages have to delve into it, is thinking about what color mana we need on the turns we need it, and then what turns are the actual turns where you want to be casting certain spells in order to optimize mana to get through development. And I don't know if any other mages talk about it in a way that like miracle mages have to, but like. Back then, in the era of that notebook that Anu just showed us, it was like, yes, you wanted specifically blue, white, blue, blue to get off the ground, because you knew that you were going to need to convert some white card to survive development, and then your end game was Jace, and you wanted to get through that. So it was always blue, white, blue, blue, white was for the longest time. That was your development out of the early game. And then once we moved towards like the heavier double white stuff, as people were trying all this random stuff, that changed to be blue, white, white, blue, and all this is to say, like, the depths that we have gone to try and solve this unsolvable puzzle.
Everything that you said there, absolutely. Like I understand it, like tit for tat. Like I'm literally looking at deck lists right now that are described as like, this deck list is Miracles 19+1, and that's like 19 lands in the main deck with the mountain in the sideboard, right? Like code like that, right? Like Thoughts versus Grixis Delver. Entreat seems good versus more mid-rangey versions. Mentor not necessarily better versus Pyromancer heavy deck. This is sick. Anyways, so getting back to Beanpile though. So I would say that this is like the decks that I play nowadays are basically the fire equivalents of old school Miracles. It's just one of those things where like the power level of these decks is absurd. At this point where like you just I personally feel like I can't ignore it. I won't speak for Phil here, but there are 2 cards to me that have recently been printed that have basically brought control back. And those cards are Up the Beanstalk and the One Ring. I think if you like follow Legacy, you'll know that for a while Iteration was legal, and that card was very good in this deck. There was also Minskin Boo. That card was also really good in this deck. And I think with the banning of Iteration, cool, okay. The One Ring is just straight up stronger than Minskin Boo, I think. It on average draws a lot more cards. It has fantastic synergies with the deck. The protection layer that you get is fantastic, right? Because you get to tap out for a turn, and you can go shields down if you really need to. With cards like Terminus, you can recoup the tempo loss. With cards like Mystic Sanctuary, you can access any card in your graveyard very, very easily. And then Beanstalk is like the modern day Predict almost. I mean, it's certainly not as elegant, nothing ever will be, but it is the kind of card you put to play on turn 2, and you just like sit, and then you play a regular game of Magic, and then eventually you're just like, wait, I can't hold all these cards in my hand. So I think that's the first thing, is like pivoting to that. And then you have your usual culprits of like Uro, Swords, Force, like all the good control cards that have we've seen over the past little bit here.
We should mention that this is a Urion deck, right?
Yeah, that's a good point as well. And this is going to be a kind of a bad answer, but the reason I'm playing Urion is because I couldn't fit everything in 60. And I'm just trying to make it work. That's actually how it started. But then more and more and more I played, the more I was like, okay, wait a minute. Yorion is actually pretty good. Has fantastic synergy with Up the Beanstalk. It's a 5-mana spell that draws a card when it's on the stack, and then also draws a card in the end step when the bean comes back. So that's already amazing. Obviously, it pitches to Force. I think there's another development from the Lord of the Rings set that makes Yorion a bit more viable, and that is the printing of the cycling spells, the Lorien Revealed. One of the issues with Yorion decks historically has been finding a proper blue count, because you delve into the cycle of like, okay, you've got spirit. What's the card? Staff of the Storyteller,
Mhm.
right? That makes spirits, yeah. Like Fable, Minsc and Boo, all these like non-blue threats that are very good value engines, but then you suddenly run out of cards to pitch to force. So now Lorien helps with that, but then also when you jump up from 60 to 80, you introduce a lot of volatility into the network of how your mana functions, right? Your brainstorms get a little bit worse. Your ponders aren't exactly, they don't have that same kick. And there's a concept in Legacy that I really like, and I'm sure you two will instantly realize this, but it's the idea of like lowering your curve. I mean, Delver is the greatest example of this, and that's kind of what I want to do with this deck, right? Is to play a very low to the ground curve that has as few lands as possible, but can still operate, because you never want to flood out when you're dancing at casting your spells at 0, 1, or 2 mana. And Lorien definitely does help there, right? Sometimes it comes in as a land that comes into play tapped, but that's fine because you can hold up your 1 mana instant speed interaction. Sometimes it's a 5 mana draw 3. Sometimes it's a 5 mana draw 5. Like it is a card that I think has literally changed all of Magic, not just Legacy, not just Modern. We're even seeing it in Vintage, and I think to a degree it's also seeing play in Pauper. I think I'm not 100%
such an
sure.
understated design. Like, we didn't see this. This was not a card when we did our big, like, all the Lord of the Rings cards. Like, none of those land cyclers we even mentioned,
Yeah, and I think that the point that looking back at when we did that set review, I think the thing that we missed was looking at, like, if we zoomed out from just that set review, and we recognized that most of the power that has been presented in a lot of the recent sets that the control lists really want are non-blue. And we didn't think about what it would look like if a land slot could be blue. We just like the blue count just was not something that like came to mind when looking at those cards in the spoiler. But like all of the good card draw, all of the good, like a lot of the good threats have been non-blue, and that we've wanted to, like, what the last good blue card that came out of a set was what, Uro. Otherwise, it's been Beanstalk, One Ring, Minsc. There was Staff of the Storyteller for a short period of time. Like, they got rid of expressive iteration. So then, like, from there, it was just like all this density of non-blue beyond the cantrip suite and Force of Will. And so it's like, okay, our baseline is like 16 blue cards, maybe 19 blue cards. But it's like, you can't, I don't know about what your threshold for risk is, Anu. Like, when I see lists, like right now, I'm operating on a list that's like been fluctuating between 20 and 22, and I feel naked. Like, if I am if I'm anything below 23, I'm like, okay, I guess I'm just jumping off a cliff and hoping I survive,
Yeah. I am in the same boat as you. I remember so many things, actually, like even like back in the day, like that, even like when we're talking about like risk mitigation, like, do you remember like Joe Lassette's Miracle deck had like 16 blue sources or something like that? Dude, like, that's the kind of anxiety I'm getting when you're hearing you talk about this sort of thing.
I'll tell you a quick story about like Lassette Miracles from back when it was the relevant way to beat, like, good miracles. So Legends Miracles, it was good against exactly the mirror and nothing else, and that's because it had Cavern of Souls on Wizard, and there was no way for Miracles to really interact with outside of Back to Basics. But it's like beyond that, you just fought over the Back to Basics, and then anyway, that Miracles deck list back in the day, it was 22. It was a 22 land, 3 counterbalance Legend Miracles deck that played Plains, Caracas, Cavern of Souls, Mountain in the main board.
Jeez.
And I remember, I remember playing. The thing is Joe was consistently putting up results because he was just beating up on all the other Miracles players because he was teched out pre-board for that matchup. And I remember, I don't remember who it was, but another player, this was at SCGs, a player came up to somebody at one of the tables that I was sitting at, and I just overheard the conversation, where he came up and he was like, okay, I'm playing like the 4 predict top Miracles, but Joe keeps top 8ing these events on these Legend Miracles. And then he like runs through the mana base. He's like, but it's got 2 Plains, 2 Caracas, a Cavern of Souls, and a Mountain in the main board. He's playing 3 counterbalance. Like, this is shit, right? Like, I'm not crazy, right? Like, this is bad, right? And everybody's like, yeah, this is bad. This is bad. It's all bad. Everything is bad. But like, he was making it work because he like just identified. I remember there was also like some lists where he was playing only like there was a point where we all started cutting swords to plowshares just because Miracles was the best thing to be doing. All that is to say, coming back to the present time, back then, it took a long time for us Miracle Mages to recognize that 4 Predict was just the best thing to be doing. Like, we didn't get to 4 Predict for a while. But, like, that kind of threat alongside Jace the Mind Sculptor and stuff meant that our blue count was relatively good. But then since then, Jace has fallen off. Predict has fallen off because Beanstalk is better, Ring is better. So it's like the shift away from blue cards towards these power creep non-blue cards that controllers actively want makes it way more, like it devalues the power of your forces. But the power creep has been such that you need your forces more.
Yeah,
and you're playing more forces because they printed force negation.
So it gets really, really tricky. The palette, it's been a puzzle in and of itself, and I think that's where Lorien Revealed comes in. It's just like, hey, not only do I help you with mana issues, I also pitch the Force of Will, and if we get to it, I also just pull you massively ahead in Top Deck Wars. So like,
I mean, imagine that card in like 2014. You know?
Yeah, the card is just really, really, really good, and I think like. The metric that I would use to like evaluate this card again, if I had the microscope one more time, Magic has always boiled down to one thing, and that is mana and how to optimize your spells with regard to mana and balancing power level based on how much mana you're spending and everything, mana this, mana that, right? So when you have a card like this that like says, like, because before then we had never seen one mana for island cycling, no. And so this is like maybe the most disgusting version of power creep, because it affects something so like sacred, almost like, just mana, right?
Anu, off of that idea, you and I have been thinking on the same wavelength for a while now. Then it seems one of the things where I know that like it didn't correlate at first, but one way, and tell me if this jumps out to you as well. Back when we had Top, one of the most powerful things that Top allowed for that was not on the surface at all. The stuff on the surface was counterbalance lock, flipping instance B terminuses. Like that was the stuff people saw. But one of the really, really potent power level parts of Sensei's Divining Top was that your white mana, your planes, gave you card selection. You could cantrip off your planes. Yeah. And that mattered. Yeah. That was huge because you could develop early, go island planes, and you wouldn't have just naked mana sitting on the table not doing anything. But then when Top went, and then we started trying out like Portent and Preordain and stuff like that, getting up planes was a liability because it was dead mana during development if you weren't converting a white card. But Lorien Revealed lets you use your planes or your non-blue mana to cycle to continue your development. And that's so potent.
I think so too. Also, you're right, absolutely right. That like you could use a card like Wasteland to find up an island or something like that, like we see out of all these like Delver decks and whatever. Like it is remarkably powerful and very, very well disguised, to the point, and I don't know, people are going to disagree with me here, but like I think it is even more impactful than a card like the One Ring or Orcish Bowmasters, because like let's be real here, those two cards you could probably power creep them out, but I don't know how you power creep out a card like Lorien outside. What, 0 mana island cycling? That's never going to happen.
The way they do it is exactly what it is now, but it's an instant instead of a sorcery. Like at some point they could do that.
Oh, sure.
But like a quick example of like to imagine like how important the island cycling part for just colorless is. I want people to just like imagine, who have played with it or played against it. Imagine if it was island cycling for blue. It's a wholly different and way less powerful card.
Yeah.
It may still be good enough, but it is so different from what we experience now.
Well, I think the thing that kind of threw me into the zone of like, oh, this card's good, and I'm gonna say something controversial here, so get ready. This card is the best interaction in Legacy since Brainstorm Fetchlands. Very controversial thing to say, but so here's why I'm saying that. Because I've been looking at Death Shadow builds, one of the decks I can build, and I had an interview with Tron is Bad a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about how you can just keep a Wasteland hand if you have Lorien Revealed. You're gonna be like, okay, cool, I'll just keep Wasteland, and the deck is playing 2 less lands now. It's playing 16 lands in a Delver deck, basically. You know, we're cutting 2 lands so that we can play more cards. And the cards we're adding are the cards that go, oh, I guess I get to play. In this case, it's Trollicons at Doom, but like you get to play Reanimator as a strategy, and it just works. It's like all these cards are allowing you to do what Fetchlands and Brainstorm did, which was lower the amount of lands. We used to play like close to 30 lands. You know, like you play like 26 lands in your control deck, 25 in a mid-range deck, until Fetchlands and Brainstorm became like a thing people knew how to do, and they were like, oh, I can lower down to 20, you know, somewhere between 22 and 18 lands for a Legacy deck. Now it's like, I can play 16 in a Delver deck? That's wild.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic realization, is that like it allows you to sort of just make your deck even leaner. It keeps your floor consistent while increasing your ceiling, and that is very, very rare to find in a card, because there are a lot of cards that just have like risks, and the risks on this cycle of cards is
What's
like,
someone gonna stifle you?
it's really, yeah, I mean, like, yeah, right, like that's what it takes. That's what it takes. But yeah, so Lorien Revealed is one of those cards that I think has also just made Yorion specifically a bit more playable. The other thing that I noticed, so this is kind of twofold, but the metagame really revolves around one card right now. And that card is Orcish Bowmasters IMO. You must have an answer to Orcish Bowmasters. You must make every brainstorm and ponder with Bowmasters in mind. Because if Bowmasters enters play and then does not leave play, as a control mage, you're kind of just, you're stuck, right? And so that made me realize another thing, which is that the effectiveness of a card like Pyroblast, which, you know, I have literally played 5 copies of Pyroblast in my sideboard at one point. You know, when blue decks were just like that, like when iteration was that bad.
When there was a viable blue threat that you needed to answer.
Exactly, right. And now that's a great way of putting it, Phil. There just isn't. And I think it's migrated to being this 1 in a black Orcish Bowmasters card. Why do I want Pyroblast? It doesn't do anything against grief. Murktide is cool to kill, but like we have Leyline Binding now, which is another addition to these decks, thanks to Up the Beanstalk and just like Unholy Mana.
With
I don't know. Pyroblast is like not that great. I would not.
And Orcish, and Beanstalk. Is it Spell Snare's time?
We're cooking.
As we get cooking, we all want it. We all want Spell Snare to be good, right? We're all like, give me that sweet trade up on mana, delicious. And I just like, I am just not a believer in those conditional counter spells, because if your opponent is aware of it and just chooses to figure out like ways to maneuver it, it's one of those things. I feel like the format is so powerful now that the opportunity cost is those cards.
Yeah.
You like, because you can't really afford to port yourself, because the game can be lost in development, you know? And so it's like, if you're like, all right, I'm on the draw and I open Ponder 1 land Spell Snare, and you're like, am I supposed to hold this thing open? But then they play at instant speed. And then I'm like, okay, well, I can Ponder to try and find my second land, but if they just throw in the bow, like if they're aware of the Spell Snare, they just play the Bowmaster before after I've pondered, and then that Spell Snare's dead. Or if I hold it up and I know that they're playing an instant speed, then I feel like I have to hold up the Spell Snare, and if I whiff on the second land on my draw, now I could be naked. I might find myself in the bad position of having to play this Ponder into the Bowmaster that the Spell Snare was supposed to catch, and the Snare is still just sitting in my hand dead. It's like, it doesn't, you can't convert it as cleanly in ways that like later on you could sort of like cycle a Veil of Summer so like it's like I think, Anu, you put it like really, really well, where you're like, the floor is high and the ceiling is elevated. And I feel like the way that the threats now, particularly because they're at instant speed, it just plays around that 1 mana interaction so much smoother than before, where it's like, if they play expressive iteration, it's sorcery speed. You know they have to cast it. If they don't, then they are sitting on it in the same way that you are. And it's like, okay, if we're in a holding pattern, that's great for control. But the fact that they can maneuver, it just, at least in my testing of trying to make that stuff work, I have not found the way.
Yeah. There are a couple punishes. I also think it's just like, and I hate to say this, but it's just like other cards are so powerful that I'd rather play those. Now, I will say one thing, which is in an effort to sort of make a concession to cards like Bowmasters and address like the kind of, well, basically that, right? A card that has really overperformed for me personally is it's a 2 mana spell. It kills creatures and it also counters spells. It's Drown in the Lock. This is like, the power level on this card is not quite there, but it does a lot of things for Yorion specifically. So this is the setup here basically is me sort of explaining how I've sort of transitioned away from playing, this 4-color no black deck into a 4-color no red deck, which is really interesting because Pyroblast is a card I played for so long. But with the discovery of a card like Draw into the Lock, it allows me to sort of play that Drago game a little bit more effectively. If you look at other lists in the metagame right now, you'll notice, like, for example, Zio Franconi, who won the showcase recently, was playing 4-color no black and had the Pyroblast in the sideboard, but was playing cards like Force of Negation in the main deck. And I'm not a big fan of that kind of card. Similarly with like Dress Down, not a really big fan of that card. This goes back to the conversation of, like, if an opponent's threat sticks and stays in play, we're kind of dead. Force of Negation doesn't do anything against Bowmasters, and Dress Down gives you a 1-turn window to answer Bowmasters, and if you don't have the answer there, you're in big trouble, right? So going back to Draw to the Lock, this is the kind of card that, like, I think it's good against a variety of decks in the format, and I think it's also a very good card to top deck in certain dire situations where you can just go like, all right, pop your Bowmasters, now tap my ring to draw some cards and get back in the game kind of deal. Also, what I've kind of realized is, like, the power creep of Magic in general has made not just specific decks viable, but many, many, many decks viable, right? Like, imagine like the Dark Ritual Shieldred, like Leyline Helm sort of decks that exist. You've got the initiative decks that admittedly, like, you're not very good against, but now with the resurgence of a deck like PO, for example, like, you need some sort of catch-alls for this. And I think Drown in the Lock sort of, it's not perfect. It's definitely, like, a card that has weaknesses, but it does cover some holes in the deck. And so for that reason, I'm kind of a fan. The big ticket item, though, is that it kills Bowmasters, which, like, at this point, I found that I need like 13, 14, maybe 15 answers in my Yorion deck just for that one card, because I can't beat it if it's in play.
I think to jump up, to piggyback on that, I think a couple ways in particular that aren't clear at first glance with how the meta has sort of broken out with Bowmasters in it is a lot of the things that are good that seem to play well now are indicative because of things that Bowmaster has done that we aren't necessarily seeing. So, for example, Narset and Teferi, I feel like, are at all-time lows compared to what they were before Bowmaster existed, because Bowmaster is very good at checking those kinds of walkers. And because of that, there are some spells that otherwise would not be viable that become way more viable because the presence of those planeswalkers aren't there. But also, the presence of those walkers not being as potent, like, you'll still see them, they're still good cards, but you won't see them in the same numbers that you will before. And that also implies that Pyroblast's power level is gone down. Because for us control mages, having Pyroblast on the board to deal with a Narset, which had a similar effect to Bowmaster, but way more punishing, and Teferi, which cut off a lot of the ways that we interact, having Pyroblast was the most efficient way, really the only viable way to deal with those cards outside of presenting just more attackers, which is tough because if you were going outside of something like, the Uro coming back, which is too clunky and slow to really deal with it if they've resolved it, or like something like Endurance, which is like a very easy way for those types of decks to deal with anyway, then there wasn't really a viable way to clear it from the board unless, you had your like fourth or something, right? And things that Teferi did was it was really hard to play anything with Flash because Teferi could just put it right back. So the value of haste went up. And so that's where fourth was really good at, like, checking opposing planeswalkers. That's why Minsk was really good at checking opposing planeswalkers. But Bowmaster has changed the paradigm on the value of those planeswalkers. Because if you play a Minsk and they just go Bowmaster, hit your boo, attack your thing, and then it's like, okay, make another a token or whatever, but then, okay, sit back with your token, don't do anything, and then if you try and draw cards, you're just going to get domed and make a giant guy because when it all resolves, like, you still take the damage off the Bowmaster. So it's like all of these things subtly make it so that planeswalkers have been worse because there's 50% Bowmaster in the metagame. And so that makes the shift from red become way easier into other cards like black, where then we discover things like Drown in the Lock being really solid. I was looking at recently, I've been trying to figure out how to leverage Terra Sunder as a card in the board, because it's a really good way at dealing with sagas. You want more ways to deal with Urza Saga. It's cheap and can interact in those matchups. It's another way to Chalice and stuff. But then it can also check opposing rings before they can get a counter on it because it's an instant speed. But then the fail-safe is that you can still hit anything because it has the black splash on the kicker. So there's like, that card I don't think is really a way that, like, I wouldn't have looked at that card before when I was like, I need Pyroblast. But now that we don't, those kinds of cards become way more appealing, particularly because we need to slant harder into green for Beanstalk.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. And speaking of like green as well, another card that I think is low key an all-star for these control decks in particular too, is Force of Vigor. I've sort of realized like this card does a lot. Firstly, it's fantastic in the mirror, against all these enemy up the beanstalks, against leyline binding in particular. That is a very, very, very powerful sort of interaction that I've learned from playing a little bit of Modern, is that you can really, really like make leyline binding look embarrassing. But then also when you look at the metagame, you're mentioning some critical cards here, right? Like Urza's Saga is one of them. I think initiative decks, I'm not so sure how good Force is, because they have Chalice, but is there anything really else there? But the fact that it's it's good against these like blue or Saga decks, it's good against control, potentially playable against initiative. Like that is a wide spread of cards that you are able to handle using a free spell. And you can Mystic Sanctuary back to, like, the synergies are just like off the chart kind of deal. I'm pretty stoked about that card as well. That's another card that I think is underrated, that has made a really nice addition. But yeah, I think in terms of like Bean Pile as a whole, like it's stable, it's in a good spot, and it's been doing really, really well. Like whether you're playing black or whether you're playing red, the results are being posted everywhere. There's just like a certain like couple things that you need to check here and there. Like Bowmasters is one of them. Make sure you have answers to like the various cards in the format that maybe you rely on Forces, maybe you rely on Dress Down. I think Dress Down is maybe better than I'm giving it credit for, but like I mentioned for the reasons earlier, like I prefer more permanent answers to cards. I think Bean Pile is in a pretty
One
good
of the
spot.
things I wanted to bring up, and getting in before Phil does on this about Force of Vigor, is it allows your mana base to be all non-basic lands, because you can still cast this against a Blood Moon.
Yes. Yeah. That's another big thing too that I completely did not talk about, is that Blood Moon has been the bane of my existence for I don't even know how long.
Dude, how far have we come? How far
29 years?
Right?
29 years, I think, is the answer.
From our 7 basics never giving a shit about those types of cards to like now we're just like, please don't Magus me. Please don't Magus me.
I know. Yeah, I've got 3 copies of Hydroblast in my sideboard, Phil. I have 3 whole copies of Hydroblast. Like it's tough. It's tough.
Dude, so I've been trying out a bunch of different options, and tell me like if you've navigated these areas well. Recently, I was trying out. So I've been playing Force of Vigor for a while. I recognize that like the kind of 60 card miracles that I still like to play. I'm still a Terminus and Treat gamer. What it do? But I found that when I tried playing the Leyline bindings, I didn't like how susceptible I was to it getting blown up. And I didn't like that once we had moved into Beanstalk, they had already wanted to bring in their stuff to deal with the Beanstalk anyway. And then Leyline Binding would get all of the flack from that. And I found that like there would be positions in like mirror matches where if my opponent ley lines and they go after my Beanstalk with it, I'm like, I'm happy to let this resolve. The game's going to get to a place where we're going to try and blow this stuff up on each other. And you're giving me an additional card draw on top of like like that's not what the matchup becomes about. The matchup becomes about the Beanstalks, but it's like if you're not dealing with them permanently with like a PE or like a Terra Sunder or whatever else the options are, that like having something stick on the board, it's too. I find it to be a liability, so I've moved away from it. But one of the other things that I was trying for specifically Force of Vigor, obviously Blood Moon, but when they would play Magus, I'd be like, I feel dumb. I have this Force of Vigor and they played a Magus the Moon. Like I should have solved this problem way back. So I was like, okay, well, if the similar space, if I don't want to have to lean into making my mana worse, Solitude becomes a really appealing answer to deal with Magus. And then I was like, okay, if I'm playing Force of Vigor and I'm playing Solitude, then I'm really interested in trying out Kira. And this is in a 60. And, I'm trying to think if there's like other spaces for that in Yorion. But then the more and more I got into it, the more I was like, I feel like the process for us as the control mages is trying to solve all of these problems all at once. And then we end up finding like clever ways to get around it. And it usually just comes back around to finding the simplest form. And so I've moved. My next thing is I was iffy on the Solitude thing. I moved back to just being like, all right, I'm just going to play a basic plains in the board, similar to how we played basic mountain in the board all those years. And maybe that's just the answer. And then when you're playing against the Magus stuff, you just, I'm going to aggressively fetch for the plains, not have to worry about this thing. And then if I need to get my colors back, I can turn off the Magus later. But when you're solving all these problems that, the format as it shifts progressively, do you find that do you notice that there are certain cards that you keep coming back to, or certain plans that you keep coming back to that just fit your play style for Yori on 80 that has like, have you just found those like things that are more potent for you, even when you try a bunch of other things? Because like testing, and we could test ad nauseum all these cards that are good in certain situations, but then if it just comes down to, do you find that you navigate your games to a certain way, and then that makes you steer towards cards that some people may otherwise not agree with you on? So a good example for you and I think you and I are the only people that are diehards for Cosmic Rebirth at the moment.
Love that card. Yeah. So I think the real answer to this question is less so about like any specific card choices, but more like how I like design, right?
Yeah.
And the answer to that question for me is redundancy. Is I want to basically do the same thing over and over and over and over again. And the reason I can justify doing that thing over again is because it's a very damn good thing that I'm doing, right? So in this instance, I suppose, let's see, how do I justify redundancy here, right? So I was playing like more disenchants in my sideboard at one point, but then I kind of realized like, okay, like in an 80 card deck, what is more likely? Drawing my 2 of sideboard card or fetching for a basic plains, right? And when you say it like that, you're just like, wait, like fetching for a basic plains, that's like so easy, right? Everybody can fetch for a land. And so those are the kind of solutions that I generally like to draw to. Like if I like Drown in the Loch, admittedly, is a kind of card that like fills up slots in the deck. It's not the card that I'm like the most proud of, but it does a lot, right? So I can look at that card and be like, okay, well, there's a creature in play. What do I want to do? Well, kill it, obviously. Okay, so that I'm putting a spell in here that is, it's like multimodal, right? Like it can kill the card in play, or it can counter the card on the and another card on the stack, right? Basically, sort of just having that A, flexibility, and then like B, the redundancy of that, right? I kind of realized a while ago, and this is kind of interesting too, because with when expressive iteration was in play, or when it was a card that you're allowed to play, right? I think basic planes was just really bad. But now that card has been banned, and like the turn patterns of like how you want your mana to appear in play is like, Tundra, and then maybe like for me specifically it's like Bayou or something like that. Like planes is not the worst because it doesn't stop me from casting a number of spells that I need to cast. But big picture, I don't know if I'm really saying this really well, but it's just like the idea of redundancy is much easier to digest than having like silver bullets. So I look for cards that are generically applicable. A great example is an article that Jerry Thompson wrote a long time ago where he was like, all right, well, you have 2 cards, right? You've got like Supreme Verdict and you've got Disenchant, right? What do? You have 1 extra slot. Do you put another Supreme Verdict in, or you put another Disenchant in? And he was like, actually, let's turn to a card like Council's Judgment, which can like flexibly handle a lot of things. It can remove a creature, or it can remove an artifact enchantment. This is a very valuable card because it just gives your deck a bit of more. It doesn't necessarily do the same effect as the other ones as well as they do it, but it's like that sweet like Goldilocks spot in the middle that gets the job done, and is a card that you are never like really upset to draw because it always reads I do something, right? That's the thing about control, is your cards need to be flexible enough where you don't get dead draws, which is, again, like going back to why Bowmasters is so cool, is because it punishes you for trying to play that sort of flex game plan, right?
I mean, if we're looking for more consistent draws, Anu, can I interest you in my good friend, Portent, my guy?
You was gonna say it. I knew it. I knew it.
Good friend Portent there. So, I mean, one thing I want to mention, or I want to ask you about, now that you've like shifted a little bit more into black and you're moving away from red, are you still playing 4th Aerlingus? And 2, on 4th, have you found that 4th is a consistently good card? And I asked that from the lens of, when I tried 4th, what I found is that it was always a 10-2 card. it never felt like it was like you were talking about, like the consistency that you need, the redundancy that you need. It always felt like it was the card that was lights out, or it was the card where I was like, oh man, if I introduce the Monarch, like it is going to be the thing that kills me. Like I will be my own demise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'll tell you a story. My opponent went turn 1 island preordain. After I played my land for the turn. Turn 2, I go land go. They go fetch land pass. I think they maybe like I forget what it was. No, they thought seize me there, and I was like, okay, I play against Doomsday. Cool, this is gonna be easy. Draw for turn. I'm like, oh, 4th Aerlingas, let's go. 3rd land, slam the 4th, attack with my token, get the Monarch. ETB or sorry, end of turn they go Orcish Bowmasters, and I'm just like, well, I lose this game. Yeah, it is certainly kind of swingy, but here's what I will say about this card is that from my perspective, I kind of look at it as Entreat the Angels with upside, only because I don't really ever want to cast it on turn 3. But it also gives you like that fireball win condition that I think this specific build of Yorion kind of wants, because we're really good at controlling the board. We're really good at drawing cards, but closing the game sometimes is really tricky. And then it just turns out like the utility of haste is something that I want in my back pocket at all times. So, I did say I was playing 4 color, no red. I lied. There are 2 copies of 4th Aerlingas in my deck just because the card is that good. And to clarify, like, to make it all work, like technically it's like 5 color soup. There are like 2 red sources. One's a triome. So it's certainly contentious, but I think the first copy at least adds so much to your deck. For example, the returns are just like unignorable. You know what I mean? Like you play 1 copy and suddenly you get live draws at stages of the game that you never had otherwise. It's like the first copy of Terminus, for example, right? Like when in the back of your mind you're looking at a board full of creatures and you're like, geez, I wish I had. There are a lot of scenarios where it's like, well, they just played a Teferi. And we both burned our forces, and now, well, geez, I wish I had a way to get rid of this Teferi. 4th Aerlingus is like one of those cards that could kill your opponent, but it could also kill a Teferi, right? Haste is ridiculous. Haste is absolutely ridiculous. Things like that. I think there's utility. There is a very clear downside to the card, and you kind of just have to either A, accept it, or B, just don't play it on turn 3. You know what I mean? Like sometimes you have to have that like patience to not play it until a better spot. And that's tricky. That's very, very tricky.
Coming up on the end, I just wanted to state one thing that I think is really cool about Drown in the Loch. I want to go back to that real fast. This, especially when you're taking out red, this fills the space that Lightning Bolt like kind of has for Delver, where you're like, maybe I need to go to the face to end the game. Maybe that modal ability is like something I think that the control decks were missing anyhow. Is just to have that sort of versatility.
Yeah, I that's part of the reason why I have it in the deck. I mean, like you can look at cards like Force of Will and Swords to Plowshares, like they're super flexible. Drown in the Loch isn't quite there with the same power level since it costs 2 mana, but here's what I also noticed, and maybe this is my closing thought on a card like Drown in the Loch, is that it's a problem solver, and a great example to sort of explain what a problem solving card is like Cosmic Rebirth, right? So in Modern, for example, what I've noticed is like there are a lot of game states where I'll play a Planeswalker and it dies, and then I need to find a way to resolve my spell. And I also notice my life total is going low because I've been chucking the ring a lot, and that's where a card like Cosmic Rebirth comes in, because it's like, well, it can bring your Planeswalker back, unlocking a threat that you can play at instant speed on your opponent's end step. It can also literally just ramp you, which is very, very powerful in control. It gains you life at instant speed. Like if you're at 2 and your ring's about to kill you, and your opponent's like, okay, what are you going to do about it? You're like, all right, I'll just gain 3 life. And then usually that's a game-winning play, by the way. It breaks a lot of paradigms and it solves a lot of problems. And then you just bank on the rest of the deck to cover like the other 99% of scenarios, right? So in the case of Legacy, it's like, all right, cool. Like I have Force of Will, I have Swords to Plowshares, and I have Terminus, and that's going to cover most of my scenarios. But sometimes Orcish Bowmaster is going to like slip through the stream and then land and play. And at that point, I'm just like, no, 2-mana, destroy you. Nice try, right? Like it is like that kind of card. And plus, it's also like, it's another card that kind of like is very good to like seal the door shut with, if that makes sense. Like Mystic Sanctuary, target my Drown in the Lock. I have a counterspell now. You know I have a counterspell. You have to draw 2 threats now, not just 1. That kind of thing, right? So it's a problem solver in my eyes. Because Yorion, I'll say a little. Yorion it's like when you factor in 80 cards, you can't afford to polarize your deck too much. You can't have all swords and all forces, because then you'll draw the wrong card at the wrong time. That's the kiss of death in a deck like Control. That's another kind of problem that Drown in the Lock solves, right? Like it multimodal, does lots of things, and it's like filling that you put in like holes in the wall when you're pulling a nail out, kind of deal. I don't know. That's a really, really bad analogy. I'm sorry.
No,
but
it translates. I mean, there's how often have we been like, yep, we played against combo in game 1 and we drew the white half of our deck instead of the blue half, and so we just died. Like that happens. And like to this day, we still as control mages have the luxury of like, all right, like we've been playing draw go with our opponent, and it's probably because they are sitting on a bunch of white cards that have no text. And we get to leverage that. And it's like, instead of like they drew a white card, we drew a counter spell instead. That in another matchup is like we drew a removal spell instead. So it's like leveling that. You said it. You actually did say it well. Leveling the limiting the amount of times that we have those draws where cards don't have text is valuable. Like cards that just always have text is way more valuable than cards that don't. Right? I mean, it sounds too simple to be that simple, but it is.
You heard it here first, folks. Modal spells are good, and Anuraag enlightened us to that.
Wow. The first modal spells good. Wow.
But yeah, I mean, we're coming up on the end here. Anu, I want to thank you for everything you've done for Legacy, man. Like, the coverage stuff is beyond. Like, that's we would give you an award, but we don't have one. They haven't made one yet. Like there should be an award for people that are helping create the community and bring it together and inform them. And beyond that, the 4-color control deck is just wild. It's a study in deck design.
Absolutely, I really appreciate that, and it means a lot. Yeah, I love Magic. We all love Magic, so we do what we can. And I appreciate you for having me today.
So everybody, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe. I'll do all that stuff, and we will catch you next time. Thanks for watching. Hey everybody, why don't you check out some of our other interviews, and if you got a chance, check us out on Patreon. If you can support us, that would rule. Thanks.